We do have our good friend Ari Meirov on the phone right now. You see his stuff on X at My Sports Update. The 33rd team as well covers the NFL for them. Ari, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. This week has been a crazy one, like it is every year. And like I say every year, this is my regular season. So it's a lot of roster shuffling going on, but I enjoy it every year. A lot of guys getting paid.
Lots of people getting paid. And Ari, obviously here in Detroit, I think there's some fans out there that would love to see a big splash. We have not seen a big splash. It doesn't feel like a Brad Holmes kind of thing to do, but we do see, Carlton Davis III from Tampa Bay. You do see an Amik Robertson from the Las Vegas Raiders. These guys could have an impact. What do you make of what the Lions have done so far in free agency?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been making, safe moves and moves that aren't necessarily going to screw them over in the future. And probably the best example to give is Buffalo. When they made the AFC Championship game and then lost to Kansas City, they decided, screw it, we're going to go for it. And they added a bunch of players. They signed Von Miller to that big, huge contract. And essentially now you saw this offseason how they had to release so many players and how they were so over the cap. So I feel like Brad Holmes realized that, hey, we're going in the right direction. We just made it to the NFC Championship. We have a really good roster, a lot of core players. Some guys we're going to have to pay here very soon. But we're not going to be overly aggressive to a point where in a couple of years, this could come back to bite us, and it can be very difficult. So I think that's the vantage point that he took into all of this so far. He's not going to overpay. He's not going to do some sort of contract that could eventually become an issue down the road. And like we've spoken about in the past, there's a lot of guys here who have to get paid from your own roster. And teams budget, 2-3 years out, thinking about those big contracts that are coming up from Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Jared Goff, and on and on. So I won't say that I'm that surprised. I was curious going in if they would make a splash, but it sounds like up until now they're going to stay put and try to get guys who are going to help right now and not hurt in the future either.
My favorite NFL and sports analyst, Ari Meirov. How you doing, buddy? Actually, happy Pi Day, 3.14. There you go.
There we go.
Throw that out there for you. Hey, look, enough of that. We know what it is. I agree with you 100%. We know that he's not going to pay anybody but his guys. The splashes that they'll make, there'll be Aiden Hutchinson, there'll be Penei Sewell, there'll be Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's what you know he's going to do. We know that. But do you agree with that? You look at how close they got this past year. NFC Championship game, and you can argue they were 7 minutes away if they would have got a pass rush or if they would have made the right calls in that game. Let me not hash that up for Detroit Lions fans out there. But they didn't make that move like Montez Sweat. They didn't make the Chase Young move at the free agent deadline, and that could have cost them in the playoffs. Now it seems essentially they're not doing the same thing. Do you buy that? Do you agree with how Brad Holmes is running this ship? Or do you think they need to maybe get an Eric Armstead? They need to maybe get that one more player that cost a little bit more but could fit in and help this team get over the hump right away?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, the offseason just started, right? There's 5 months into this offseason. Yeah. And I know that there is a pretty big name in your building actually right now in DJ Reader, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's someone who could eventually sign in Detroit. I know there's interest on both sides. I think contract is a decent contract. So that could be another player who could come in. So those type of players where they're value signings and it's guys who could affect the defensive line, for example, like a Reader, maybe an Armstead if it's not a Reader. I think those type of players make sense, but it just doesn't feel like he was willing to go to try to pay, let's just say, the Brian Burns trade, even though it was a 2 and a 5, that's $30 million per year, or Bryce Huff at $17 a year, or Danielle Hunter at $25 a year. I think that's just too rich for him, and that's not what Brad Holmes is looking to do. He's kind of looking through that second wave of free agents where there's still a bunch of really good guys out there. And again, I mentioned a couple of names. There's still a bunch of guys who are still free agents. There's still a bunch of guys who could still get cut. And there's some players teams are going to eventually look to trade, especially as we get closer to the draft, when teams figure out their boards and realize, all right, we might draft this guy. That means this guy becomes expendable. And there's some value there as well. So, again, we're just a few days into this free agency. Let the entire offseason play out. I think most of us, including all of you, have gotten to a point where I don't think it's right to doubt Brad Holmes after the work that he's done so far.
That's a fact, man. I know I'm one of those kind of fans that want a big splash, but you know what? When it comes in hindsight, I know the guy knows what he's doing. I mean, look what he's taken and look what he's done with this team. I want to ask you about who do you think has really improved their lot, who hasn't, and I want to ask you about what the Giants are trying to do. Is Danny Jones, is he really going to be let go? Are they moving up in the draft? Who's going to quarterback for the Giants? The Jets got questions. The Bears got questions. They hold the whole draft in their hands yet. Fill us in, Ari. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so Daniel Jones with the Giants, he has over $35 million fully guaranteed this year. So, and he's coming off an ACL injury. So there is no moving off of him. They signed Drew Lock to be the backup there. I know the Giants have done their homework on the quarterbacks in this draft. They're picking at number 6. But I kind of have a feeling that they are ready to move forward with Daniel Jones for one more year and see what he's got. There's still a lot of holes on that roster. They made the big Brian Burns trade, but they need help at receiver. They could use there's still question marks about if Darren Waller is going to come back. He might retire. So there's still a lot of questions there, but Daniel Jones is there for, at the very least, for one more year because of his contract. As for the Bears, I think the Justin Fields thing is one of the most interesting things going on in the NFL right now. Going into the offseason, we all thought, oh, yeah, they'll get a second-round pick for him. And now you look around, it's like, I don't even know where he fits. Atlanta got Kirk Cousins, Minshew of Vegas, Steelers got Russell Wilson, Sam Darnold to Minnesota. The one team I am watching that could be sneaky is probably Seattle with the Seahawks, where they have Geno Smith, but it's a new offensive staff, a new head coach. They haven't really fully committed to him, and his contract is essentially a high upside backup type of contract if you look at the numbers. So I think that's an interesting situation. They just saw Drew Lock, like I said, go to the Giants. They need another quarterback. Historically, the Seahawks are all about competition. So that is a team that could make sense to me. But after that, it's really hard to find a place for him because, like everyone knows by now, Chicago is planning to take Caleb Williams to number 1, which means what do you do with Justin Fields? And I think there's some team who could probably get Justin Fields for far better value than we thought they would be able to get him when the offseason started.
How about keeping it in the NFC North? How about all of these teams switching players? I mean, it really is hard to even keep up. Who do you think improved their lot the most in the NFC North?
Yeah, I mean, I think Minnesota is going to have a hard time figuring this situation out. I mean, I don't want to call it a reset, but the quarterback position will be very interesting for them. $10 million guaranteed for Sam Darnold. We'll see how that goes and what they do in the draft. But, I think Detroit is just slowly but surely continuing to build up their roster and continue to stay steady. Like, they haven't lost anything so significant to me. They continue to add some more players, some more depth players, some more guys who could, create problems for other teams. The one team that I am watching for is a team that we just mentioned. I mean, Chicago is building a very strong roster all around. They have, players on every level. If you look at that defense for the defensive line, they traded for Montez Sweat. Last year they added Tremaine Edmonds. They just extended Jalen Johnson. They signed a few players. They just signed another center. They're going to get Caleb Williams. They added DeAndre Swift. They added Kevin Byard. It's a team that usually when you're picking at number 1 and you're taking a quarterback in a draft, you expect to walk into a situation where the team isn't good. When Caleb Williams will get there and he'll be the number 1 overall pick, the team is walking into is a really good team with a lot of really good players. So we all know about Green Bay. We all know about Detroit. I think Chicago is sneakily starting to build something over there. And once the quarterback comes in with that rookie quarterback contract, I think that's a team that can make some interesting noise.
Sure could.
Hey, Ari, dumb question, but does the lack of interest in Justin Fields at all in Chicago, could that potentially change the course of what the Bears are going to do? I mean, can you imagine, trading back one spot, acquiring, who knows? Maybe you could fleece Washington. Maybe you could fleece New England, Minnesota, the Giants, some team that wants a quarterback. Keep Justin Fields, take Marvin Harrison, and have a bunch of picks after that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we all know the quarterback position is the most important position, and the Bears have done extensive research dating back for a few months now on Caleb Williams. Like, they've told their scouts, if you see anyone who's USC related, ask about Caleb Williams. You see somebody Oklahoma related, ask about Caleb Williams. They interviewed Cliff Kingsbury for their OC job, and the primary questions were all about Caleb Williams. Like, they've done all the work they could possibly do with him, interviewed him for the first time in person at the Combine. They still need to bring him in for a 30 visit, and in fact, they actually tried to bring him in before free agency started, and just the two schedules didn't line up. But they've been doing all the work you could think of when it comes to Caleb Williams. So I think they're just pretty much locked in on him at this point. I understand kind of where you're coming from. At the end of the day, I feel like most people, I would say over 95% of teams, have Caleb Williams as QB1 in this draft. So I don't know what the reasoning is behind nobody really wanting Justin Fields. This was the same scenario with Justin when he came into the league. If you remember, people thought it would be Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields in this draft, and all of a sudden it became Lawrence, Wilson, Lance, and who's going to take Justin Fields, and the Bears had to trade up for him. So for whatever reason, people around the league have not been high on him, but I do know people are very high on Caleb Williams. The Bears are very high on him, and I think that's the direction they're going to go in.
Talking to Ari Meirov, covers the NFL for the 33rd team on X at My Sports Update. I wanted to ask you about Kansas City as well, because we've seen them in this offseason sign Chris Jones. What about L'Jarius Sneed? What's the talk out there with any trade movement? I know the Lions, I've heard their name associated with him in a trade before, but signing two guys already, or acquiring Carlton Davis from the Bucs and signing Amik Robertson from the Raiders, I would think that they're out on L'Jarius Sneed. I don't know. What's the latest with Sneed and the Chiefs?
Yeah, so the talk at the Combine was once the Chris Jones deal gets done, they were confident it would get done, that they would, trade L'Jarius Sneed after tagging him, and they gave permission for his agents to seek a trade. The three teams at the time that I heard would be very interested were the Lions, like you said, and then the Colts and the Titans were the other two. And it was my understanding that a second-round pick would be the sweet spot to get it done. Now, when it comes to doing these type of trades, you really have to have three parties agree on this. You have to satisfy the Chiefs with a pick. You would have to satisfy L'Jarius Sneed with a contract, and the team that is acquiring him would also have to be okay with the contract and the picks they're giving up. So a lot of moving parts when it comes to all of this. I would imagine the Lions are out. I do think the Titans and Colts are probably still in all of this, but the Chiefs' intention is to move him. They do believe they have a bunch of other young DBs, of course, McDuffie. They have Watson. They have a few other guys. They've been really good when it comes to drafting cornerbacks, so they feel confident they'll be able to continue doing that. But the belief has been a second-round pick would be enough. I think the harder thing is getting a contract done, and we just saw, Jalen Johnson and the Bears. It took them over a year to get a contract done. These cornerback contracts have gotten a little bit tricky because the market hasn't reset in almost a year and a half with Jair Alexander's deal, and for whatever reason, teams don't want to go over that. So I think that is part of the issue over here, is where you got to do a contract and the picks, and that's been part of the holdup so far. But like I said, the Chiefs would like to trade him, but you got to get all sides to agree.
I want to ask you a quick question about two guys that didn't sign back with Detroit, and that's one, Jonah Jackson, who signed 3 years, $51 million with the Rams, and then CJ went back home to Philly, 3 years, $33. Both those players were very pivotal, at least Jonah Jackson was, for the Detroit Lions on the offensive line to the tune of 1 yard extra per carry when he was in there. Do you believe that not being able to sign those two hurts the Detroit Lions? Because CJ is a guy that we think here maybe provide that energy spark, and then you saw what that line was when Jonah was on it. Is that something that could come back to bite Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell?
Well, I want to see what they do the rest of the offseason. Obviously, they brought back Glasgow, and then when it comes to the safety position, I mean, we've talked about it really since before free agency started. There are so many safeties who are out there that there is going to be some value signings at some really, really good players who can still pay. So I understand why Brad was like, you know what, we loved Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but 3 over 27 with max of 33 is just too rich for us.
Yeah.
I get it. It makes sense. Look at how many other guys who are still available. So I think they'll let this market play out, because eventually they're going to be, like we always say, it's a supply and demand situation. There's way too many safeties and not that many teams who need all these safeties. So eventually there's going to be some guys out there who Detroit could sign for far cheaper, and they'll be fine. And then when it comes to the guard position, I think a lot of people have mocked the Lions getting an offensive lineman. This is an offensive lineman-rich draft as well. And as we said, they re-signed Graham Glasgow. So I understand why it hurts a little bit to lose Jonah Jackson. He's somebody that you guys drafted. I know it was before Brad, but somebody who was a Pro Bowler. But I think they'll be just fine with both those guys leaving. I'm not as concerned as maybe some people might be when it comes to those two.
Hey, Ari, last one from me. I'm sorry, Bray, were you going to say something?
No, you're good. No, I
was going to ask you about these rule changes that have been thrown out there. How many of them you think will stick? There's one for an onside kick. You could get the ball back on the 20. It's like a 4th and 20 type of thing. I don't know what that is. Someone wants to add tenths of a second to the clock in the last minute of the game. What can you tell us about these kind of rule changes, possibilities?
Yeah, every year there are a bunch of proposals that are made by teams to change rules, to fix some stuff. And I've gone to the owners' meetings the last several years. In order to get a rule change to actually pass, it is such a headache. You need to get 24 teams to approve of it, 24 owners to approve of it, and they have to go into a room and discuss. And to get everyone to say yes, it just feels like, and I've heard that it is a headache. So some of these probably won't get passed. The one that I could see getting passed is one that the trade deadline right now is after week 8. There's been a few teams that have proposed moving it to after week 9 or even after week 10.
Yeah.
And the reason for the proposal is when the NFL expanded to 17 games in 18 weeks, the trade deadline stayed the same way when it was 16 games in 17 weeks. Like, why didn't that move also? So it makes a lot of sense, and I think because of it, it would create way more action during the season with the trade deadline because more teams will know, are we in or are we out? Because the trade deadline is right now, there's teams who are 4-4, 5-4, 4-5. It's like, maybe we could still make a run. If you move it over to after week 10, I think more teams will know, all right, maybe we should sell off some of these pieces and maybe we should be more aggressive getting some of these guys. So I think that is one that could definitely change, and I think the NFL wants it because they love when there's, free agency frenzy, trade action. This is what they want. So that's one that I could see happening next month when the owners meet in Orlando.
They got to fix the kickoff, man. The kickoff is useless. Onside kick is useless. They got to fix those things. They got to.
That is another thing that I think will happen. They will change the kickoff to make it more of it not being useless. There's been a couple of proposals. That is one that is high on their list. The kickoffs and also the hip drop tackles are two things they do want to work on, and I think those two are far more serious than the shot clock that you mentioned, or the 4th and 15 or 4th and 20 onside kick.
You got it, Ari.
Ari Meirov,
thank you.
From the 33rd team, covers the NFL for them, and of course, one of our favorite guests. We really appreciate your time, Ari. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for making it work. I'm sorry we couldn't do it on video, but I'm sure we'll be next time.
We love you, man. Thanks for sticking with us.
Thank you for making it work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.